I don't think that there's anyone that the Republican Party hates right now more than Donald Trump. So, what do I mean by this? So Donald Trump has recently endorsed Ken Paxton for Texas Senator against the incumbent John Cornyn, who's held that seat for a very long time now. And the Republican establishment knows that right now the Republicans are on a bad footing when it comes to going into the midterms. The Republicans need to ensure they can keep every single seat they possibly can at the moment. They cannot risk losing seats in the Senate especially. They already know they're going to be losing pretty big in the House. The Senate is where they have a structural advantage and they want to keep that advantage. John Cornyn, the longtime Texas senator, him staying as the Republican candidate gave better odds for the Republicans to hold that seat. With Ken Paxton, the likelihood of them winning is still on the higher side with him. But the issue is with Ken Paxton, it's just, why would you want to risk having lower odds when you can have higher odds with John Cornyn? But for Donald Trump, it's not about winning elections for him that matters as much as loyalty to him. We've seen time and time again where even the slightest bit of disloyalty towards Donald Trump, you can have voted 95% of the time with him. You can have voted 98% and 99% of the time with him on issues. But if there's one time when Donald Trump needed you and you said, you know what, I can't support you on this, that one time he will remember and hold over you for as long as you're in politics or any other realm. And John Cornyn, unfortunately, was on that side of Donald Trump's ethos, you could say. John Cornyn is fundamentally one of those old guard Republican establishment figures that didn't really like Donald Trump when he came into the political scene in 2016, was obviously a bit skeptical of somebody like him just because of the track record he's had when it comes to his personal life and the fact that he was a former Democrat in a different lifetime. Let's just say John Cornyn was not very fond of somebody that was an outsider coming in and taking over the Republican Party. However, John Cornyn realized, hey, look, Trump's clearly a popular figure. I'm going to attach myself to him as much as I can just because of the fact that the base likes him. And this was post 2016 when everybody realized, oh, look, Donald Trump's not a joke in politics. He's actually a political figure and a machine that's here to stay. But Cornyn just was one of those guys where, yeah, I'll show him a bit of support and love as in just voting alongside him whenever he needed it. But post 2020, after J6, a lot of the old guard Republican establishment figures thought, okay, Trump is done. Trump is out. He's never going to be getting back into politics again. He's going to be a one-term president, and he's pretty much leaving office having left the Republican Party in shambles. Cornyn was also one of the few people that was actively suggesting the idea of charging Donald Trump post J6 with insurrection. And he just put himself in this weird position where Cornyn knew that after 2024, with the re-election of Donald Trump, the only way to stay off of Donald Trump's bad side is to appease him. I think a lot of world leaders have figured this out. Pretty much whoever visits the White House or is meeting Donald Trump, they know that if you want to get something out of him or just make sure that you don't have a Zelensky type moment with him, you just have to be very nice and appease him. Cornyn was starting to do this. He was suggesting naming highways around Donald Trump to get on his good sides, but that's just not enough. And Ken Paxton, the state attorney general for Texas, who's been a very loyal foot soldier for Donald Trump, he's never been negative on Donald Trump. And at Donald Trump's lowest moment, post January 6th, one of the few people that was still riding with him in the establishment, you could say, was Ken Paxton. And Ken Paxton was actively suing other states, trying to get them to flip their electors. And even though he knew this was probably not going to work, even though everyone knows that election played out the way it was supposed to, was not a rigged election, Donald Trump was just very sad and bitter that he lost. And now that we get to this moment where both of these two challengers are facing off each other, Ken Paxton and John Cornyn, what's been very interesting to see is how much more support you could say Ken Paxton's had compared to John Cornyn, because in the original primary date back in March, both of these two figures got around 41 to 42% of the vote, meaning there was no clear majority winner, so they had to have another runoff, which is this week. And the establishment figures like John Thune, the Senate majority leader on the Republican side, really wanted Donald Trump to step in and endorse Cornyn, because the thing about Cornyn is, even though Donald Trump doesn't like him, he would still be the better figure that would represent the Republican Party going into the Senate election, because he just had better odds against the Democrat nominee, James Tallarico, because Tallarico is one of those figures that even in a state like Texas could pull off the unimaginable, possibly. If there isn't a strong Republican candidate against Tallarico, then it's almost like making the odds a lot more favorable for the Democrats on purpose. So John Thune and the other Republican figures high up in the party were telling Donald Trump, hey, look, come in, please endorse Cornyn. We know you have your problems with him. We know you don't think the most fondly of him, but please come in, because we cannot afford to lose a seat in the Senate. We're only up by 3 seats in the majority right now. And even with the 3-seat majority, there's still times where the vice president has to step in and be a tiebreaker vote. So losing somebody like Cornyn on the Senate, regardless of how you might feel, Mr. Trump, please keep him around. That's what the figures were saying, essentially. But Trump's just not a person that works like that. He's very much based off relationships, how you treat him. And if you were there at his lowest moment, he just makes these mental notes about everyone. And once you go negative on him once, he will turn his back on you forever. And he's come out and fully endorsed Ken Paxton, because Ken Paxton was MAGA all the way, has been. He's never been disloyal to Donald Trump, and is now reaping the benefits of being so close and personal with Mr. Trump, especially right now too, because he is on the receiving end right now, you could say, of the electorate, because a lot of the policies that he's implemented just have not panned out in making costs go down. If anything, costs are frankly moving in the wrong direction, and we're seeing the polls all suggest that President Trump is on his way down when it comes to the general electorate. However, with the Republican voters, his endorsements still carry a lot of weight, and if he decides to endorse you, you are more than likely going to be the Republican candidate. You might not win the seat that you want, but you will still be the Republican nominee in the primary. Just look at what happened with Thomas Massie. Thomas Massie didn't support Donald Trump in every single piece of legislation, and Donald Trump decided to back Ed Galbraith, and Ed Galbraith won the primary and is now going to be the Republican nominee in the midterms that's going to represent that district. And he ousted Thomas Massie. He ousted those state senators in Indiana that didn't vote to change their electorate maps when it comes to the House redistricting. And now we're going to be seeing John Cornyn get ousted. Now, obviously, the results haven't come in yet, but when you're at a tiebreaker before Donald Trump steps in and then Donald Trump steps into the race, you're more than likely going to win the seat, or at least a nomination, not the seat necessarily. And the Republican establishment's not happy. They're just not happy. They're all very frustrated that Donald Trump keeps throwing wrenches in the way of the party, because fundamentally Donald Trump does not care about the party. The party's always been a means to an end to power. That's why he can flip-flop between Democrat and Republican, because these are just arbitrary titles to a means to an end for him. And what's also been so fascinating when it comes to this specific race is the fact that Ken Paxton and John Cornyn, fundamentally, one candidate spent over $100 million, while the other has barely spent any money, because Ken Paxton is just not a great fundraiser. John Cornyn is a good fundraiser. And considering how much more money John Cornyn has spent compared to Ken Paxton, the fact that they were still at a tiebreaker is kind of showing how much more on-the-ground support Ken Paxton has when it comes to Republican primary voters. But this might be one of those cases where, sure, this person is very popular in the Republican Party and the Republican electorate does not mean it's going to translate well. But in a place like Texas, it's still going to be hard for somebody like Paxton to win because of the scandals he's had, the adultery and the financial record stuff that's come up. James Tallarico also is a great fundraiser. He's sitting on a war chest of over $25 million, which is fascinating to see for a state senator race, but it kind of goes to show how much of a broader appeal somebody like a Tallarico has to the moderates and independents in Texas, even though there's already a built-in structural advantage for somebody like even a Paxton to win, considering it's a plus 13 state in the 2024 election, meaning even though, yes, Donald Trump has dropped fair bit in the polls, currently sitting around 35% approval rating averaging. Still, he carries a lot of weight in a place like Texas, and it's going to be very interesting to see how this race plays out, because Cornyn, on the other hand, sure, he's a boring old Republican establishment figure. With him, the odds were very favorable for Republicans to win. With Paxton, they're still favorable, but it's just, why would you want to risk somebody like a Paxton, who's had scandals behind him, against somebody like a Talrico, who's very good at coalition building and reaching out to independents and moderates? These are fundamentally two figures they're going to go head to head, and it's going to be very interesting to see in the midterms. It's going to be very interesting to see if the Republicans can hold on to this seat. If I had to predict which way this race would go, personally, I would say it's still leaning more on Paxton winning, but I do think it can still be a very close race, considering Talrico's ability to reach out and build coalitions, But I also think this kind of sends a warning shot to other Republican senators who are thinking about going negative on Trump, or at least thinking that they were going to get spared because at a time when Trump needed them, they weren't there, and Trump remembers this. So it's very interesting to see. I think the grip that Trump has on the Republican Party, especially when it comes to primary voters, is very strong, and we're going to just have to see how it plays out when it comes to these other Republican figures, because I think the waves were definitely pointing to the fact that Republicans were going to start growing a bit of a backbone and actually contradicting the president, and even breaking the lockstep that we've seen so far from 2024 till now. But these last couple primaries have just proven that, hey, if you go against the president, be prepared to do it at your own risk, because the president can get you defeated in your re-election bid. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, hit that like, comment, share, subscribe. I break down politics on here from the way I see it, and try to just make these interesting discussion type analysis videos. If you enjoyed, hit that like, comment, share, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in my next video. You guys take care. Peace.